Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese. We kind of have a little bit of an emergency episode here, given that it seems like the Vikings have hired Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as their next head coach, or they haven't officially hired him, but all of the big names, right? Schefter, Rappaport, Tom Pelissero, basically everybody's going in and saying the Vikings are going to hire Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as their next general manager. So that's really exciting. How we got here is kind of interesting. It sounds like the Bears didn't let Ryan Poles get on the plane from Chicago to Minnesota for his interview. So, the Vikings really had identified two finalists in Poles and Adofo-Mensah, and it sounds like Poles is probably the next general manager at Chicago, which means Adofo-Mensah is the guy for the Vikings. And that's not to say that Kwesi was a second fiddle candidate where we didn't necessarily get the guy we wanted. We interviewed Kwesi first, right? His second interview was before Poles' second interview in terms of schedule, so that kind of indicates that the Vikings maybe were leaning him a little bit in that intro anyway. But Nick, Kwesi was your guy, right? We've talked multiple times on here. He was who you wanted throughout this process, so why don't you give us the background on him, who he is, and what he's going to bring to the team?
Yeah, I got the receipts. I got messages in Discord going back to last year saying, if we move on from Spielman, Kwesi's my guy. So, yeah, it's really exciting. I felt that he brought a very unique value add to the team in a way that a lot of other guys don't. Ryan Poles, I think, is going to be a great GM for Chicago. Has been director of college scouting in Chicago, so I definitely understand. I mean, the Chiefs have just been drafting so many amazing guys, and the guys they found in the later rounds have been amazing. And it's always tough. I mean, you don't know if that's Ryan Poles or somebody Veach or somebody else in the building. It could be all sorts of different guys who don't necessarily want to attribute that to him, but just being a former offensive line guy, being a highly, highly respected scout, totally understand why the Bears would jump to hire him and would probably. It seems like we got a conflicting report. Some people say like Bears leapfrogged Vikings, paid him more, and didn't let him leave the building. Vikings might have lowballed him. Other people are saying no, like Adofo-Mensah was the Vikings guy all along. But either way, I think Poles was kind of like your traditional GM candidate, rose up through the ranks as a scouting candidate, whereas Adofo-Mensah came up really from a very non-traditional football background. He played football in college, but he went to college at Princeton. So, kind of like actually, it's very similar to Kevin Stefanski, Ivy League college guy, but like wasn't an NFL player, but came up through the ranks nevertheless. So. We previewed it before in our episode 2 weeks ago, but Adofo-Mensah, was studied economics at Princeton, got his master's degree in economics at Stanford, and worked on Wall Street. And economics is an interesting, field of discipline. I was an econ grad, and it can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different programs, whether it's like psychology or macro types. A lot of people hear economics and they think like macroeconomics, like monetary policy, fiscal policy, trade, but like it's also like there's like a lot of microeconomic stuff. So anyway, he leveraged that economics degree into going into Wall Street, which is anybody who's that's like a whole treadmill, from going from Ivy League schools into becoming rich on Wall Street, putting in your years and then going off to something more interesting. And that's kind of what whereas Ivy guys will go like 2 years at J.P. Morgan and go to like private equity or something. Like he was like, I'm going to do 2 years as a commodities trader and then I'm going to go to the NFL. So he worked for the 49ers for, I think, from like 2012 to 2018, I want to say, as part of their analytics department, helping build models. And analytics is so funny in that people think it's like fourth down decision making
Yeah.
and like Moneyball, and it's so much more than that. It's a lot of it is like data collection and preparation and making models. It informs who you take in the draft or what measurables you look at in the draft and how you value them, how you weigh them, how
Yeah,
you
and
aggregate all the data.
to
Go
add
ahead.
in here on the analytics a little bit, like the analytics side of things isn't new to the Vikings organization. Rick Spielman was a very analytics forward GM in terms of what they were using to analyze people. They had personality profiles on everybody, and that's actually an analytics tool. They were looking at all of the data for all of the draft picks or the player and the player's success, and they had all of these profiles on these guys, and they look at it over time and look back over time to see what's successful at each position, what are indicators moving forward that are predictive for each position. It's not like a new concept, and it's not just going for it on fourth down or whatever. The Vikings aren't necessarily going for it on fourth down more often than anybody else because we hired an analytics forward GM. It's really the background and the ability to interpret data and that information to make sound decisions. That is what analytics means. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, and it's sports science. It's like medicine. It's how do we keep our guys healthy, and if they get injured, how do we accelerate their recovery timelines? What can we do to keep the roster healthy? It's cap management. It's which you know, at the risk of getting into this whole the running backs don't matter. It's which positions do we think should we invest in from our own squad? Who are the guys we should prioritize from our own cap management? It's pro scouting. It's college scouting. It's stuff like, the Rams famously used their analytics department to figure out that Cooper Kupp was a lot faster than his 40-yard dash time tested him, just because they were able to like study his college tape and just use that to approximate 40-yard dash time. So it's stuff like that. You're finding edges in the draft, in college scout, or in pro scouting, in sports science, in cap management, and everything. And you can and in-game management. Vikings are probably going to be going for it more on fourth downs and doing more analytics forward in-game management. So it all ties into that. And the biggest obstacle that we see today, and the biggest obstacle that people in analytics departments and the NFL cite when they say, like, why isn't the NFL more like sabermetrics baseball? Why are they so behind the times compared to the NBA? Why are they behind the ball when it comes to analytics? And the big reason is, there's just not enough institutional buy-in. We don't have these organizations, like, they'll pay some lip service to it and they'll hire like a guy, maybe two guys, but they're not going to prioritize this and listen really to the smart nerds in the analytics department. So having the institutional buy-in from a guy like Kwesi Adofo-Mensah really means that, like, now we can really be at the very cutting edge of this, because it is something. It is. I'm not saying to say it's taking over the NFL, but, like, I think there's an analytics movement happening in the NFL. We're seeing more and more teams go for it on fourth down more and more often. We're seeing teams pay running backs less and prioritize wide receivers more and draft wide receivers earlier. Understand how the passing game affects things. And it trickles down to scheme stuff too. The Fangio Staley or take the Bills. Running nickel 100% of the time, never using a third linebacker. That's prioritizing coverage is an analytics thing too. So it just colors so many different things, and I feel like, compared to your traditional scouting guy coming up the ranks or cap management guy, which Adofo-Mensah has some experience. He talks about, like, when he was in the 49ers, he collaborated a lot with the scouts because he was like, this is a blind spot I have that I want to learn, and I want to be able to, like, scout players too. So he's learned, but he's mostly there. He's hired to be a listener and a collaborator, and I feel like his analytics background gives him a unique value add. So it's a really exciting add for the Vikings. I think the Vikings are now going to be, you can expect them to build out their analytics department and become like the analytics powerhouse, I think, of the NFL. I think that's fair to say. Andrew Miller, who's for all intents and purposes the CEO of the Vikings right now, technically he's the COO, but only because the Wilfs are like the owners. Right. Andrew Miller was a sabermetrics guy himself. He came up out of the Blue Jays analytics, or the Cleveland Indians analytics department. So he's come over, and Mensah was an Andrew Miller guy as well. So they kind of go together, and I think you're seeing this institutional buy-in. So the Vikings are going to be a very analytics forward movement. And I know, like, people have a lot of different opinions about what analytics is, and what is it good, is it bad, is it just an annoying thing, is it just guys arguing about when you need to kick a field goal or when you need to go for it. It's just so much more than that, and I think there's so many edges in basically every single area that we think of, like, what is football, from roster management, cap management, the draft, in-game decision-making, scheme, play design, defense, offense. I think it touches on all those different things, and I think this is going to be a pretty transformative hire, I think, for the Vikings organization. So I'm excited. I think it's a big change. It's a big step forward, and it's a positive one. So I personally am pretty darn excited about it.
Yeah, I want to pull out a couple different things that you talked about there. I mean, that's a really comprehensive overview of Kwesi, right? Like just basically the nuts and bolts, how he came up, where he comes from, and the one thing you said that stuck out to well, the first thing you said that stuck out to me is like everybody argues over what analytics is, which is just like such a dumb argument, and the level of discourse is so low on that side where it's just like I don't know. Everybody latches on to like these individual points or it's individual plays in games, right? That everybody's complaining about, and it's always like supposed to be a referendum on analytics. When like in reality, like the analysis that everybody does in a football game, like the decision to run those cover four, cover two shells from Fangio and Staley, that's an analytics decision, and that's looking at the statistics, analyzing them, and saying, look, this is the best way for us to defend this because this is what's going to lead us to be most successful on defense because guess what, passing the ball is more successful than running the ball, so we can give up a little bit in the run game. Now going full tilt into that becomes problematic where if the Chargers can't defend the run period, they're going to lose football games, right? But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about just the ability to uh, rationally look at decisions or like to an extent remove emotion from those decisions, right? And I think that's the big upside that somebody who comes from Wall Street whose background is trying to do that analysis. In Wall Street you're literally making money, right? Your goal is to make money. If you don't make money, you're bad at your job, right? So if you come from that and you're good at your job, like you're probably good at that independent decision making that I think you need to have. The other thing is it's not like Kwesi is coming straight over from Wall Street or straight over from some sort of business organization. He's been in the NFL, like you said, since 2012 for like 10 years at this point, right? I think Sashi Brown, who was the Browns GM back, a handful of years ago, was supposed to be an analytics revolution or whatever. He either came straight from Wall Street or he came from a non-NFL background primarily and had very limited NFL experience. Kwesi's been in NFL rooms, has been scouting, has done that sort of thing. And I think something people don't realize is that the general manager role isn't necessarily, some super scout, right? That just is either right or wrong on all the draft prospects, and that's all they mean, or like good at trades or something like that, and that's all they are, like identifying underused players on other team. No, like there's an entire team of scouts that is responsible for college scouting, right? And Rick Spielman as the GM, sure, he would go to games and he would ultimately contribute to the scouting process, but he's not the only person you have in that room looking at that. Another big part of that is coaching, right? Andre Patterson stood on the table for DJ Wanham. Spielman in his interview with Move the Sticks talked about our drafting of offensive linemen was heavily influenced by the outside zone scheme that we wanted to run, right? That's heavily influenced by coaching. So you have to have a guy who's able to manage all of those different personalities in the room, get everybody on the same page in the decision. That's the main requirement of a GM, right? So I think you shouldn't be afraid of somebody with an analytics background who comes from a non-traditional football background because you're scared that we're not going to be good at scouting all of a sudden or something, right? We have the infrastructure to be able to do that. Jamal Stevenson, if we retain him, does a very good job from the college scouting side, right? So at the end of the day, I kind of went around a little bit here, but like the GM job is a lot more, and hopefully, right, we don't know what the interview process is like. We don't know all that much about these candidates beforehand. I kind of am hesitant to develop an opinion on guys, but hopefully doing the due diligence, going through this process, the Wilfs identified a guy in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah who can lead the organization, right? Because that's what he has to be as a leader, setting the tone for this roster building and setting the tone for the coaching staff moving forward.
Yeah. And don't mean to cut you off,
Yeah.
but just a couple things I think worth responding there. A lot of what low tier coaches or like the sort of the grunts on the coaching totem pole do is essentially analytics. Like when Belichick asks one of his assistants to be like, "What is every call this offense has done on third down?" Like that's what analytics does as well. Analytics will do we'll look at When we roll coverages from, like two high shell to one high shell pre-snap, how does that affect Jared Goff's EPA per play on passing plays? That's like really, really actionable information. And the analytics guys are the guys who can build a model that can very easily pull that information and realize like, oh wow, like Goff sucks at making like post snap reads when
Yep.
the coverage shifts compared to other guys that like Matt Ryan is really good, and he's, you're not going to fool him. You're more likely to fool your own defense than you are to fool Matt Ryan or something. And so they're able to like extract a lot of edges that can affect in-game scheme and management. So for the people who think like analytics is just nerds number crunching, which
Yeah.
they some of the analytics people have fun on Twitter, but they don't always like do a job like selling like the
No,
value add of
and
analytics.
real quick, those coaches on those staffs are called quality control coaches. You can go look at any coaching staff; they'll have multiple quality control coaches, them on each side of the ball, and they are doing analytics live. They really are. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to echo that you were saying is like people think like, oh, this guy is just like an analytics nerd, and all of a sudden he's 40 years old and he's a general manager. Like, is it bad that we aren't hiring like a football guy? And it's like, no, this guy is a football guy. He really is. He was getting GM interviews last year. He's like the hottest riser among anybody in the NFL right now. Well, that's a little hyperbolic, but he's in like the Athletic had a 40 under 40 list last year, and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was like the first guy listed who wasn't already like an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, or like GM. So he's an extremely well respected guy. He was Andrew Berry's #2 in Cleveland for the last 2 years. So we're talking about like if you remember George Payton under Rick Spielman, it was like 1A and 1B there. Like that's who Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is. So he's kind of had a front seat role to everything Andrew Berry has done in Cleveland over the last 2 years. I think Andrew Berry has done a very, very good job managing the Browns. Obviously, this year was a little disappointing given the expectations they had. But I think the last 2 years under Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, the Browns have been kind of a model organization in the process that they approach things. Finding Jack Conklin and extending him for 3 years. I think it was like $30 million right before Brian O'Neill and all the other right tackles come in and blow the lid off the right tackle market. Finding a lot of like value free agencies, cutting bait on Odell Beckham Jr. Finding like finding guys in the draft, trading up for JOK in the second round, trading down later parts of the round. I think you'll see like probably I don't think the Vikings organization we usually attribute all those trades that we do in draft day to Rick Spielman, but I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is coming from an organization that in the last two drafts likes to trade, and is coming into an organization where like a lot of those trades, like that was Briz on the phone negotiating those calls too, or it was last draft it was Monens and Jamal Stevenson as well. So I think the downside to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is he's a little green. He's young. You're asking a lot of him to come over. He may or may not have been the Vikings' first choice, depending on which reports out there you find to be more credible. And he doesn't have the same sort of scouting background, so he's going to have to rely on other people. But the reason I think that I'm okay with those risks is that he's coming into a very well-run organization where like Jamal Stevenson was like the internal candidate for promotion to general manager, and they thought about it and they didn't go ahead with it, but like they think really really highly of Jamal Stevenson. He's done some really great work scouting for the Vikings over the last few years, really last decade. So and Ryan Monens too. Like these are like top tier guys, and like Brzezinski is like I don't know if he's the number one. He's the best guy at cap management and contract negotiation. But if he's not, he's definitely in that top tier, I think. So Mensah is coming into a framework where he's going to be able to hit the ground running, and he has a team ready to go. And he's just going to bring a new perspective, a fresh perspective. I mean, he's got a really unique background. So I feel like the value add that he brings is just going to be different than what you would have gotten with anybody else. And I think he's going to have the infrastructure to help him in the areas where he's a little more inexperienced. So really excited about it.
Yeah, and so I do want to clarify one thing too, like the lack of scouting experience. First of all, he was in an organization and learned to scout through that organization. That to me, that's enough scouting experience for a GM to be able to make those decisions. Because first of all, the scouting process is a collaborative effort, right? You have a number of scouts and you have to come together and you cross check and you do all that sort of stuff. But like NFL teams hire scouts at like 20 years old with no experience and are like, here, we're going to shove you in a room and you're going to watch film for like weeks and you're going to learn how to scout and then you're going to be really good. Like that's how they pay them like 20 grand a year. That's how they train scouts, which is a terrible process in my opinion. But like scouting isn't rocket science. Is all I'm
Yeah.
gonna say on that point. So like you
The
can
other
tell
thing
when
is
a
like
player's good and a player's bad. Like it's really hard. Like the personality side of it, I think, is the hardest part. Um,
yeah. You're not hiring like your GM to be a
yeah,
scout. You know,
right.
you don't want your general manager like grinding tape. It's an executive role. You're there to
Yeah,
like be the CEO of the team and make decisions. And you know, the CEO isn't preparing the accounting statements himself. He's relying on everybody else to bring those to him and to be a good listener and a good collaborator and to make the best decision and have the judgment necessary to make the right decisions
yep,
for the organization. And so you kind of get to so many people just get promoted out of like scouting and you get a little bit of like the Peter principle, like this guy's a very good scout, therefore he will be a very good like executive type. That's not exactly, it's a completely different skill set, but I mean it helps to have
yeah,
that background and know what you're doing, but it's a completely different skill set. I'm not worried about Adolfo Mensa. Like the number one thing anybody talks about him is like, man, he's such a good collaborator, listener, team player. He really gets it. He's really willing to like learn from everybody else, and he really fosters an inclusive environment where everybody from different perspectives can come in and give their piece and like be able to contribute to the discussion and have varying, differing opinions. And I think that's going to lend itself to good decision making. I think for the Vikings.
yeah. So one of the things you mentioned there is the Peter principle in terms of
Never going to
like,
shut
oh,
up
them
about
being a
this
good
whole
scout
episode.
is going to make them a good general manager, right? Another job that we do that a lot for is head coach, right? Where like, oh, this best coordinator is going to be a fantastic head coach, when really the role is entirely different, just from a leadership perspective. Again, where you have to set the culture for a team and set the tone for a team. That's not something you have to do on the other side. Now, with Kwesi coming in, that he probably has a preferred list of head coaches. The biggest name I've seen floated out there, right, is D'Amico Ryans, who was already on our list, who he worked with in San Francisco. So that's where the connection that people are making there. I don't know how much steam that has from like a Kwesi, his guy is D'Amico Ryans, right? Or that's just people trying to put connections together. From the head coach search, it does sound like Dable is going to the Bills with the guy from the Bills who became their general manager. None of the other head coach positions, to my knowledge, are filled. The Bears, it sounds like with polls now, have narrowed it down to Caldwell, Dan Quinn, and I'm blanking here. I don't know if you can help me out.
Eberflus, is that how you
Yeah,
say his
Matt
name?
Eberflus. Matt Eberflus, the Colts defensive coordinator, which I didn't really want any of those guys anyway, so I'm not.
Eberflus is kind of interesting, but
Yeah,
Caldwell and especially Dan Quinn, I'm
yeah.
no.
No,
I do not want.
I'm
I don't
good on.
want. Do not want a defensive mind who's like a significantly worse defensive mind than Zimmer. So
But so I know you like Dable. I know you like a couple of other people.
looks like
Or
Nathaniel Hackett's
McDaniels.
going to
Josh
Denver.
McDaniels was your guy, really. It doesn't sound like he's gotten no steam in terms of going anywhere, so I doubt that's going to happen.
It's been rumored to Houston, but it sounds like they're not going to be able to pry him away. So
Sure.
it's just the Patriots connection there continues. But
Yep.
McDaniels is safe and extremely highly compensated in New England. So
So anybody else
probably.
you're kind of looking for right now? Any looking at kind of have a favorite?
Uh, Good question. I mean, we'll see if they expand the search. I imagine that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah will have his own list of preferred guys. I've said this before, and listeners know this. I'm not super enthused about any of these. I have like this guy would be interesting. Like the tiers I have is like there's nobody that I'm like thrilled about would be doing backflips over, but like of the tier, and there's like a lot of guys who like I have no interest in hiring Dan Quinn. I have no interest in hiring. I don't know. There's some bad names out there. Some guys that I think could be intriguing are the Nathaniel Hackett. Sounds like he's going to Denver, but him or the Rams offensive coordinator, what's his name, Kevin
Kevin
O'Connell.
O'Connell.
Any of those guys who have been sort of spearheading very efficient wide zone offenses. I mentioned this earlier today on Twitter. 3 of the 4 championship teams are wide zone teams. So like the trend for the NFL to go more and more wide zone isn't going away anytime soon. And the roster is set up for it with their offensive line, with how good Kirk Cousins is on the boot, on the rollout, on the play action stuff, with how good Dalvin Cook is, especially as a zone read type of, or not a zone read, but like reading the gaps or reading his reading zone runs and the way
Yeah.
he's able to create space for himself on his own. So the roster is just really set up to succeed that way. Like if we wanted to become like a power offense, we could, but there's not many dudes on our team that are like that would like take advantage of what they do well. So I think it makes sense to get a guy like an O'Connell or a Hackett. I do like D'Amico Ryans. I think he's done a really good job. I am kind of intrigued by what is his name? Raheem Morris.
Raheem Morris, yeah.
Just because he was a passing game coordinator for Kyle Shanahan, but is also a defensive coordinator. I'm not sure he's like good at any of those jobs, but just the fact that he has the experience on the resume is pretty good. So,
Yeah.
um, I don't know. Anybody who like gets to coach Von Miller, Aaron Donald, and Jalen Ramsey, their defense is probably going to be pretty good, regardless of what the scheme is. So, I don't know. Those are all the guys that I would be happiest with one of those guys, but I don't know. I don't have any strong opinions on any of these coaching candidates. So, I don't know. Do you have a favorite?
I think that's a fair point. Like I don't have anybody who's like number one with a bullet, right? Where it's like this is absolutely the guy I want. Kevin O'Connell to me is kind of like when somebody says Kevin O'Connell, I get the instant reaction of like, do I really want like another Sean McVay guy, right? Like, do we really want like another Sean McVay disciple as a head coach? But like, it turns out that all of the Sean McVay disciples have become really good head coaches or like headed really efficient offenses, right? The Bengals with Zach Taylor, he was that guy. Matt LaFleur obviously was that guy. Mike LaFleur for the Jets kind of didn't do great this year, but that roster is kind of a disaster, so who knows? Maybe it'll become.
I don't think that's his fault.
Yeah, I don't really think that's his fault either. Cliff Kingsbury, I guess, shook Sean McVay's hand at one point, which the Cardinals put on their website when they hired him, which was an all-time reason to hire a head coach. But all those guys have been pretty successful just leading offenses, and that offensive mind type has kind of been really interesting. I think I would prefer Hackett in that sense, but like you said, I think he's kind of gone to the Broncos, and he doesn't really seem to be too high on the Vikings' radar. The two guys I kind of stood up for last week, and I think would be my favorites at this point still, are Ryans and Raheem Morris. Now, obviously that's a different type of head coach, right? That's a player-leader head coach. D'Amico Ryans, his track just reminds me of the Mike Vrabel track, right? Mike Vrabel has gotten the Tennessee Titans to drastically overperform their talent, in my opinion, for like 3 years straight. And I really think that's a high-quality head coach. And he did it this year. They got the number one seed after losing their offensive coordinator, right? Arthur Smith became a head coach and, replacing with Todd Downing, who is not a great offensive mind, in my opinion. So the D'Amico Ryans, he's really come on as a coordinator, has been really respected, obviously as a former NFL player. Sounds like from a leadership perspective, he's got everything there. Raheem Morris is like the shining example of a player leader. He is like the guy I don't think you can find a player who has a single bad quote about Raheem Morris. Obviously, he has previous head coaching experience. And for Raheem, I kind of like that. Like that kind of, like Dan Quinn's coaching job that he did in Atlanta kind of has me out on Dan Quinn, right? That's a big part of the reason I don't want Dan Quinn. Raheem Morris was the Bucs head coach like 10 years ago, right? Over 10 years ago. He was like 32 when he started, and it was after the Gruden era. They kind of gutted the roster. He got 10 wins out of Josh Freeman the first year, and then it kind of fell apart. But he's had time since that point to reflect on it, right? Like, he's been through a number of organizations since that point, and he's had the time to reflect and hopefully improve his processes, right? Like, you don't know what I'm sure as a first-time head coach in the NFL, you don't really know what you're getting into, right? Just in terms of the dynamic is totally different from being a play caller on offense or defense, and that's typically where you come from. So with him, I think, it could be really interesting to see how he's grown, and obviously we can't know that from the outside, but he does have the variety of roles. With Atlanta, he was coaching offense for a while. He also took over play calling on the defense there and multiple times in Dan Quinn's tenure, and the defense got better each time he took over play calling from Dan Quinn, right? So that's kind of a strike against Dan Quinn to me, and a strike for Raheem Morris to me as well, where he is improving that. Now, we've talked about this previously. I don't think our defense is going to improve no matter what head coach we hire or even stay the course necessarily, unless we get like Vic Fangio on defense, because he's the only defense coordinator, play caller I feel is comparable to Zimmer, right? But
Yeah.
we don't necessarily need that if we get the leadership and we get an infrastructure there with a coaching staff where we can have or the cohesion, right? Because it does seem like it was kind of falling apart at the seams a little bit for the Vikings there towards the end, of the Zimmer era. So, if we're able to get a guy who can maintain a staff and maintain that efficiency through the tumult of coaching changes, right? When coaches inevitably get hired, if we do well under him, that is kind of what I think that Morris and Ryans can be if we're not able to get that offensive genius of a head coach, which I don't really think there is on the market this offseason is the problem for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, it's kind of tough. I mean, people talk about Kellen Moore, but I've mentioned this before. Like that's an offense when you have Dak, those wide receivers, that offensive line, and Zeke, like and
Yeah,
Pollard on top of it. Like, call whatever you want. That offense is gonna put up some pretty
right.
good numbers. So, um, yeah, it's tough. There are things I really like about Morris. I guess the draws for me would be his previous head coaching stints went very poorly. Obviously, like that was a while ago, but like if he went
Sure.
17-0 next year, his all-time head coaching record would be 500 still. So he's got a ways
Yeah.
to go to match. Like even Zimmer was like what 5,600 or something. So and I'm also not sure like I'm fine going with a player's coach like paradigm. Like if people compare him to Mike Tomlin a lot, which is like obviously Tomlin's had a lot of success. That's certainly
Yep.
one way to win in the NFL. But I just feel like most of the elite head coaches that stick around are elite mostly because they're elite schemers. Like when you're talking about Belichick, Andy Reid, Sean Payton, now NFL retired head coach Sean
Yeah.
Payton. Even McVay or Shanahan, these are like elite schemers in the NFL. And what makes them such good coaches is what they bring as far as just how they're able to extract the most value out of their players with their scheme and the way they coach. So I think that's a lot more common than I think there's really only one Mike Tomlin. So
Hmm.
it's tough. And this isn't to knock like Raheem Morris. I'm not like an expert on the on his defenses, but I'm not sure he brings like a unique schematic edge to him that like you get from say a Vic Fangio. So um, yeah, I'm not like crazy about him. That said, I think there are a lot of really interesting positives about him as well. So if he were the guy, I would be happy about it. So it'll be interesting to see now that we have a GM. Probably by the time you're listening to this, we will have a GM. It'll be interesting to see how quickly they start moving on that head coaching decision. So
Yeah, for sure. And, with Morris and Ryans, for me, the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator hires are going to be huge, right? Like those are going to make or break the hire as well. So, and that's impossible to predict at this point, like who they'd bring along. So, um, it really is kind of just for us on the outside, we really don't have all the information that we're working with. But, we're talking about D'Amico Ryans a little bit. We're talking about Sean Payton retiring from the Saints. There are two teams that I don't like a lot at all. I don't really care all that much about the Saints, but I'd rather not see them do well, who are in absolute cap hell right now, right? You got the Saints 70 million over. Sean Payton calls it quits. Maybe he's gonna, resurface in Dallas next year or something with Mike Zimmer as the defensive coordinator. We'll see if that happens. But and then the Packers, man, brutal loss for them. Pretty awesome. I mean, first of all, the whole weekend of football was awesome, right? I wish the Chargers, I wish the Chiefs Bills game was still going on, right? That was so much fun to watch, like those guys, those quarterbacks, and it's going to lead
it
so
sounds
many people down
hyperbolic, but
wrong
I
paths.
really do think it sounds hyperbolic, but I really do think that was the single best playoff game I've ever watched in my life. It was just it lived up to the hype, and just like the incredibly special plays, play
Yeah,
after play you were seeing from Allen Mahomes, like the arm angles, the like audacity of their like arm talent and the throws they were making, whether it's sidearm or whether it's like Josh Allen throwing like a go route against quarters or something and just releasing it like early and chucking it 60 yards downfield on a rope. The crazy scrambling and the crazy and then the last 2 minute finish was just the most insane playoff finish. Like I mean, the Minneapolis Miracle single best play, but like that whole sequence of
oh my god,
of
the 13 seconds, 13 seconds. It
I
was
believe it.
nuts.
I told my wife, I was like, "Oh man, that's game over," and she was like, "Is that the end of the game?" I was like, "Well, they have 13 seconds, but like, yeah, like you're not going to go down and kick a field goal on
Yeah.
13." Mahomes does it. It's
No,
insane,
that
insane.
was nuts. And then the 2 point, like even the like 2 point conversion from Allen to Diggs, right? Like the pressure kind of gets to him. He has to scramble to his right, and he throws, and it's just this perfect backline throw where Diggs high points it and barely gets his feet down in bounds. Like, and that wasn't even that was like not even a top 10 most exciting play from the game. So like,
If you took the top 10 plays from this game, I think I would take those top 10 plays over Kirk Cousins' entire top 10 plays of his career.
but
Like,
would you take Kirk Cousins' bottom 10 plays over Patrick Mahomes' bottom 10 plays, Nick Olson?
that's an interesting question because Kirk doesn't make many mistakes. The thing is, when he does make mistakes, they are like extreme brain
He
farts.
throws
Like
it directly to
I'm lining
Deion
up under
Jones.
the guard. Like Mahomes doesn't line up under the guard. Mahomes doesn't kneel when he's supposed to spike the ball, and Mahomes doesn't throw the ball directly to Deion Jones. So, well, Mahomes probably has some pretty stupid looking interceptions, but like when Cousins like his brain malfunctions, it's like really bad. So I don't know. Despite the fact that like he doesn't throw many interceptions, his lowlights are pretty bad too.
Yeah,
So
no. But yeah, so that game was phenomenal. The Packers game was phenomenal for everybody who hates the Packers, which includes Robbie Gold. Apparently, did you see the video of him talking to Jimmy G after where they're like F the Packers?
beautiful, beautiful stuff. I love you, Robbie Gold. Come to Minnesota now.
Yeah,
Um,
seriously.
and it's really tough for the Packers too. Like they're $40 million over the cap right now. They spent all last offseason wondering if this was the end of Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers says in so many words like this is my last year in Green Bay. Comes to a verbal agreement like this is my last year. After this, you trade me, I'm out of here, or I'm retiring. So it really seems like, I mean, things might have changed. He might have had second thoughts, or maybe he realizes, given how much money he's leaving on the table, if he leaves Green Bay or if he retires, maybe he sticks around. But it's really tough to navigate. They're $40 million over the cap. They're effectively $52 million over the cap once you factor in they have to sign players to futures contracts, and they're going to have to sign their draft class. So they need to create $52 million of space. That's before you account for the fact that Devontae Adams is a free agent. If they
Yep.
want to tag him, probably the only way they're going to be able to keep him, that's a $20 million cap charge that they're going to have to incur. Maybe they get him to agree to an extension. I highly doubt it, though. I feel like Adams is kind of out of there. Um, Adams doesn't want to play anymore in Green Bay. He wants to go play with Derek Carr, his former college teammate, or
By the
somewhere else.
way, MVS, Alan Lazard, all their other wide receivers, also free agents.
Yeah, and Randall Cobb's going to be a cap casualty as well because they would save $7 million, 6.8 million technically if they cut him, and he's probably the easiest cap decision. So like their wide receiver room is going to look completely different next year. DeAndre Campbell, a free agent as well. He got some All-Pro votes
Yeah.
this year. Had a really really good season. They had a couple other free agents coming. And like this is with like 50 million, 70 million if you assume they try to make Adams, which I think they do. Like they're probably going to try and find a way. There's ways they can get there if you cut Randall Cobb, if you extend Jair Alexander in like the most team friendly way possible to like pay him absolutely zero, like in 2022. If you restructure David Bakhtiari's contract, if you restructure Kenny Clark's contract, and basically like do the Mickey Loomis thing where you like now 2024 is going to be doom year.
And you have
If
to
you cut,
cut Preston and Zadarius Smith in there as well.
yeah, you might not have to cut both. If you cut like Turner, Cobb, you probably get rid of who's their kicker, the kicker as
Oh,
well.
Crosby, Mason Crosby.
Crosby, yeah, who had like got the yips again. If you do all that and you cut like Zadarius Smith and Billy Turner, that gets you $52 million created. You still need to figure out what to do with Devontae Adams, but at that point you could probably trade Aaron Rodgers, which I think they're going to have to end up doing. And that saved you like $20 million. You use that to tag Adams. So at the end of the day, maybe they get DeAndre Campbell to come back on like a team-friendly extension where the first year is really cheap. So we're not talking about like a total teardown, but like if Rodgers is gone, Campbell is gone, they're cutting 2, 3 of their offensive linemen, they're cutting Zadarius Smith, and they're like putting all the money into like 2023 and 2024. This is not a team that's set up to be very competitive in the long term, especially if now it's going to be Jordan Love under center. So the state of the NFC North I think, is going to look completely different next year. And the other thing is like, if they trade Rodgers, I don't think Adams is going to stick around either. Like so,
Yep.
If I were the Packers, I would probably, if I'm forced to make a decision, if I can't keep everybody, I don't think Rodgers said he didn't want to be part of a rebuild. This is starting to sound like a rebuild. So if you trade Rodgers, well, now Adams is going to want to be traded as well. So then Adams leaves, and then all the other guys who came to play with Aaron Rodgers don't want to play there in Green Bay anymore. So I feel like it's not going to be like a capocalypse. They're not going to like, they're still going to have Jair Alexander, David Bakhtiari. They're still going to have, a lot of these blue chip players. So they're not going to be like dumpster fire or anything, but like we're looking at, I really do think just from the facing the cap reality of their cap situation and what Aaron Rodgers wants, I think we're looking at a Packers team next year without Aaron Rodgers and maybe, but probably without Devontae Adams as well. That's a significantly worse team. So that completely changes the complexion of the NFC North as well. So we'll have to see what happens with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that if Rodgers is gone, which it's not a given, but like they would need to do significant work against the cap, and you kind of detailed how difficult that's actually going to be to bring him back, right? And he doesn't seem like a guy who is going to be sold by the fact that like, oh, we lost 5 pieces and we still want you to come back, right? That doesn't seem like what he's going to be. Him leaving and Devontae Adams leaving would lead kind of a void in the NFC North, right, to be filled, assuming that Jordan Love isn't good, and all the indications I've seen are that Jordan Love isn't good. Uh, but, and I guess the Lions, I don't think, are going to be ready to be able to fill that void yet, right? As long as Jared Goff's their quarterback, I don't have a whole lot of faith in them being able to do that. So, I think we've got that for at least another year before they're able to step in. The other one would be the Bears, obviously, with Justin Fields, which I do want to say, first of all, I know you aren't a huge Dable guy. The one, like, Dable, I think, would have been absolutely phenomenal for Justin Fields, given his physical talents, right? Yeah. It's like he did so much to help Josh Allen and help Josh Allen become what he is today, which is absolutely incredible, right? I thought Josh Allen was terrible. Just look at the
I mean,
last. He was bad in the NFL for 2 years.
He was terrible in college. He had like the worst accuracy of most like first round any drafted like first round quarterback. He's just like the tools were always there, but like and mentally, I think like he was always really good on a whiteboard as well. But just like he wasn't really a quarterback so much as just like an athlete learning the position. And it's going to break scouting, I think, for quarterbacks forever because people are going to take these raw, toolsy guys and just be like, it's like the Danielle Hunter effect. Like everybody's going to take these toolsy guys and expect, oh, yeah, it's the next Danielle Hunter that I'm finding in the 6th round. Danielle Hunters don't grow on trees, and neither do Josh Allen. So just an insane growth that Dable's done, both from like personal development, but also like the scheme stuff he did to take advantage of Allen's like unique size and running ability, like being 6'5", but being that athletic too, and having like QB draws and like QB power and running all that stuff and running like downfield routes to take advantage of his arm strength and stuff. So I think Dable is a really great hire by the Giants. It would have been fun as like a football fan to see Fields paired with him, but as a Vikings fan, I'm happy that like Fields will not be getting that, and hopefully we'll be getting like a Jim Caldwell or someone paired with whoever. So
so for me on Fields, like I loved Fields coming out of the draft, right? Like I've said that multiple times here, and he is mentally like light years ahead of where Josh Allen was when he came into the NFL. I think if you plug Brian Dable in there with his ability to call offense and you get him, another couple weapons and maybe you have to revamp the offensive line. Okay, so there's a couple things you need to do right as a team, right? But like you'd be pretty ripe to take off, very quickly with Dable as your coach, assuming you get a couple things right in the offseason. Assuming you bring in talent, you're ready to take off pretty quickly and be competitive really quickly. With a Jim Caldwell, I'm not sure that's going to be there. With a Dan Quinn, who knows what happens on the offensive side of the ball. But that offensive genius, that ability to call plays for a high level, for an uber talented quarterback, right? He's got the mobility, he's got the arm talent, and he's got the accuracy on top of that arm talent, right? Like, when we talk about throw strength and stuff like that, like I feel like people talk about guys like big arms, but they miss the accuracy point a lot of the time. Like Justin Fields was the most accurate quarterback in last year's draft. He can put the ball wherever he wants to, and he's shown that on a number of occasions this year. It's not like the ball's going willy nilly. I'm sure he threw a bunch of picks this year or whatever, but that's kind of on decision making, kind of on the Bears' lack of receiver talent. Like it's on a lot of things, right? But it's not because he can't put the ball where he wants to when he knows where he's going with the ball. So him not having to do was big.
Yeah. It's funny. You would think like the Bears right now would all their moves would be about like how do we maximize Justin Fields and make him like how do we build around him going forward? And I feel like the head coaches they're looking at are guys that like you bring in when you're like a messy franchise that needs like a culture like facelift or something like the John Fox to come in or like the the typical guy who comes in and like Jim Caldwell's like a good coach and he coached some good Lions teams and he made the Lions respectable, but Jim Caldwell's not somebody you bring in if you're trying to like win Super Bowls necessarily. And so it's just it'll be interesting to see what they do to try and build around Justin Fields. I think that's the big problem right now is in theory, despite, I mean, you look at Fields' numbers and they were terrible last year. He was a very, very inefficient, like on par with like some of the worst QB busts we've seen from the last 10 years. But you see the talent on film, and his highs are extremely high. But you're dealing with Allen Robinson having a down year and probably wanting out of Chicago. An offensive line that is among the NFL's worst and doesn't have a lot of necessarily building pieces around. I mean, Tevin Jenkins kind of once he finally got healthy, there were flashes, but like it's not a great. There's not a lot of like great guys to build around. Like other than the quarterback position, that offense needs some new dudes in there. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. The whole state of the NFC North is interesting because it just feels like we're all going to be so bad next year. So that'll make it competitive in a bad but interesting way.
We'll be the new AFC South. Awesome.
There we go.
No, but no, this was fantastic. I mean, I think we covered a lot of bases, right? We got Vikings new GM, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and huge detailed description of that, and then we got to make fun of the Packers a little bit, so that's always nice, and we got to talk about the Bears and kind of where we're at in the division. So that's all I have for tonight. I don't know if you got anything else, Nick.
It was a very good week for Vikings fans. So
yeah, absolutely, a lot of fun so far. We'll be back by the time we hire a head coach. We'll break that down. Probably get Greg in here to get his reactions as well. So appreciate everybody for listening. You can follow me, Matt Freese, at Fries Football. I remembered to do this. That's very good of me. You can follow Nick at Nick Olson NFL. And then Greg is at You've Been Gregged. The podcast is Kindred Skulls. You can find it at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. For YouTube, you can search Kindred Skulls. Link is also in the Twitter bio. We post on iTunes, Spotify, all that fun podcast stuff. Basically anywhere you get your podcasts, you can find us. Any parting thoughts here, Nick?
Subscribe, smash that subscribe button. Give us a 5-star review on iTunes, and we'll love you forever. And we'll love you anyway, even if you don't. Enjoy the offseason. Enjoy the playoff football. Hopefully the championship round is as good as this divisional round. Because that was, again, I really think that was like the best weekend of football in my life. So
yeah, man. Incredible stuff. I don't know. Nothing's gonna top the Chiefs-Bills game, unfortunately. Like if that could have been the Super Bowl, I would have been happy.
I mean, I think in a way, in my mind, it was the meeting of the two best teams in the NFL. So I'm just so happy about the hype. So
I agree.
Oh man.
All right.
Good stuff.
Thanks, everybody. Skull Vikings.
I love you.
Corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind. And we'll score the